The ruling by itself is not going to change things, certainly not on the ground. It's not going to end the Israeli genocide. It's not going to end the attacks on Palestinians. It's not, unfortunately, going to end the death and destruction of Gaza, which is now underway. It never would have, regardless of what decision they made. What it is doing is changing the basis on which we mobilize opposition and mobilize a global movement against that genocide. And it gives us a really important tool in our hands to use to convince the unconvinced, to win over those who are waffling. It's a huge gift, in a sense, for us. What makes it important is that it provides cover for governments who want to do the right thing, but are afraid of the consequences when the United States says, well, you can do what you want, but if you do that, you're going to lose access to our economic aid. For a poor country, that's asking a lot for them to give that up to make a statement of principle. This gives them a defense to say, look, whatever we thought about this, this is now international law. It's supposed to be what every country does. We signed the Genocide Convention. You say that you support the rule of law. Doesn't that mean we should do what the court says? So it gives cover to governments who want to do the right thing. For most governments who don't want to do the right thing, it gives the protesters in that country a new tool to pressure them with, to say, look, whatever you think about what we're asking, we want you to stop killing people. The International Court of Justice is saying this is a violation of one of the most important treaties you've ever signed. You have an obligation to do whatever is possible to stop this from going forward. So that's what makes it a vector for change. It's a change in our movement of what's possible. It's not, unfortunately, yet signaling change on the ground by itself. There's a huge crisis of democracy going on in the United States. And one of the ways it's showing up around Gaza in particular, and this is new for an issue around the Middle East, particularly around Israel-Palestine, to be having a major impact on political discourse around the country, it's showing up in the gap, the enormous gap within the Democratic Party, for instance, between the 80% of Democratic Party voters, the party of Joe Biden, and the 20% who oppose a ceasefire. The problem is the electeds of the Democratic Party overwhelmingly are in the 20% side. They're not representing the position of the vast majority of their party. Overall, of all political parties, 67%, two-thirds of all American voters want a ceasefire. That's the kind of percentage that we never get on most issues. It's the kind of thing we never get on most issues, whether domestic or foreign policy. And on Israel-Palestine, something that's critical of Israel, it's really unprecedented. So that's where this enormous divide. The question of how to close that gap is the fundamental challenge in front of our movement right now. Because at some levels, that's happening. We're seeing resignations of people within the administration. We're seeing hundreds of congressional staff coming out with public letters saying, we are not prepared to stand silent while we answer the phone in congressional offices and we hear our constituents demanding a ceasefire, and we know that our bosses are not listening. We won't do that anymore. We're seeing it from the staff of the State Department, from the staff of USAID, from the White House interns, these young kids, high school kids, who are incredibly ambitious and who have issued a statement saying, we are not the leaders of today, but we aspire to lead tomorrow, and we cannot stand by while a genocide is underway. This is extraordinary. We've never seen things like this. And right now, it has spread to the staff of the Biden for President campaign for 2024. This is unbelievable. You have the staff of the headquarters saying in an open letter to the public, Mr. President, we can't do our job. We cannot get you reelected with this policy. You must change your policy and support a ceasefire. We have over 40 cities around the United States that have passed city council resolutions, mayor's proclamations, supporting a ceasefire, proving that this is something that's not just being debated in the ivory tower or in the halls of Congress. It's being debated across our country because people understand that with the billions of dollars that we send directly to the Israeli military every year with no conditions, it makes us complicit. And people don't want to be complicit in what they see going on the ground in Gaza every day. The nature of tipping points is that no one ever knows when they're going to happen. No one ever knew when apartheid in South Africa was going to be overthrown. Nobody knew when there was going to be the kind of action that we saw coming out of Gaza on October 7, part of which was a horrific, illegal attack on civilians, and part of which was the breakout from an open-air prison and resistance against a military occupation. So it was a combination of things. No one knew when that was going to happen. These are moments in history. And the best we can do is say, what's the most we can do as civil society, as activists around the country, to support what we saw with the ICJ ruling, to support the idea that the international community has not only a right but an obligation to change the relationship of our governments to Israeli apartheid and Israeli genocide. It took us more than 20 years to normalize the debate over apartheid as a description that is both accurate and appropriate to use for describing Israeli actions towards the Palestinians, Israeli policy towards the Palestinians. It's taken us 20 days to normalize the use of the term genocide to describe what Israel is going through in Gaza, what Israel is doing to the people of Gaza. So this is an incredible moment, and we can't know what's going to tip it over the edge. If 100 more staff people from the Biden campaign come out publicly, will that do it? Maybe. If 5 more people at the State Department come out and quit, maybe. I was at a protest a few weeks ago of rabbis outside of Congress, rabbis for ceasefire, and the response they got in Congress was amazing. Jewish Voice for Peace doing actions all over the country in occupying the Grand Central Station, the train station in New York, occupying the island where the Statue of Liberty is. These kinds of actions are going on all over the country. If there's 10 more of them, will that be the tipping point? There's no way to know, so we have to do it all. One of the things that's the most important that we can do is to follow the lead of Palestinians. And Palestinian civil society, one of the most important parts of which is the anti-apartheid movement, the Palestinian anti-apartheid movement, and what's known as the BNC, the Boycott National Committee, which is the leadership of the BDS movement. The Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement has a leadership based among Palestinians in the occupied territories, in the refugee camps, in the diaspora, and that leadership has been issuing initiatives, one of which is the Palestinian anti-apartheid movement, along with many other 170 organizations are involved. And they have been drafting on an almost daily basis a sense of what is needed to be done to get governments around the world to support the impact of the ICJ ruling. We all know that this ruling is not self-enforcing. It means that it will go to the Security Council. Anything decided there will likely be vetoed by the United States. Then it will go to the General Assembly, where there will be votes for a variety of things to do to implement that ruling. But those decisions are not binding on countries. The General Assembly is the most democratic component of the United Nations, but it's not the most powerful. So what do? It means that we go country by country by country to make our governments take up these issues. The leadership of the Palestinian anti-apartheid movement has identified 8 things that we should be pushing our governments to do. Things like escalating the level of boycotts in these countries, making sure that countries sign on to the South African initiative at the United Nations, stop buying Israeli weapons. You know, one of the things that's so ironic, we've been looking at how the South Africans have led the global South in breaking the taboo of holding Israel accountable through this move at the International Court of Justice. It's also true that the vast majority of governments in the global South are buying from Israeli companies various high-tech surveillance equipment. So one of the demands is stop buying and selling weapons and military equipment to and from Israel, an arms embargo. And that can be done one country at a time, one country and then another and another. And eventually, that's how it worked in the anti-apartheid movement around South Africa. One country after another, made sure that South Africa was made to be a pariah state because their practice of apartheid had made them a pariah. We're going to treat them like a pariah. And people stopped trading with them, stopped engaging with them in places like the Olympics and in sports, and that's one of the things that the anti-apartheid movement around Palestine is calling for. Get Israel out of things like the General Assembly of the UN, the FIFA Football Association, the International Olympics Committee. All of these things are mostly symbolic, but they end up having an enormous impact on the population of Israel. It's a nonviolent way of bringing pressure to bear on Israel, and it's something that belongs to the international community. We have not only the right, but the obligation to take that on. Our governments have the obligation to do everything in their power under the terms of the treaty they signed on to and became a party to do everything possible to prevent a genocide and to stop it if it happens. As civil society, we have essentially the same obligation to do everything in our power to push our government to do that, to stop this genocide. That's our job.